Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with coverage of round 6 of Norway Chess 2018, played on the 3rd of June. We know that Dingleyren withdrew from the tournament, had to withdraw because of his hip injury and operation. Aronyan and Karana played a draw, so did Nakamura and Vachilagrav. Anand and Mamedyarov also split a point. That leaves the game between Wesley So and Magnus Carlsen. Let's have a look at that game. Here we see both players in action, Wesley So on the left and the world champion on the right. So opened with d4, d5 by Carlsen, c4, c6. Wesley So said he was very surprised that Carlsen played the Slav defense, and he had recently studied the exchange variation, so decided to use it in this game. C takes d5, c takes d5. We get a very symmetrical pawn structure. The exchange variation doesn't have a reputation of being a very exciting opening. There's a great drawing margin, but let's see what happens. Bishop f4 from So, knight f6 from Carlsen, knight c3, knight c6, knight f3, a6, rook c1, bishop f5, putting the bishop outside of the pawn chain, e3, rook c8, bishop e2, e6. You can see it's a very symmetrical pawn structure. So castled, knight d7, which is the main move here, and knight a4 on its way to c5. Bishop e7, and here Wesley So said that he had to play h3, otherwise black has something. And he explained it by showing that if he plays a3, also a logical move. Now we have a perfect symmetrical pawn structure, but then black has g5. And after bishop g3, he has h5. You have to save your bishop. h4 is the threat, so you have to play h3. But then there is g4 with a strong initiative for black, as Wesley So said. And that's why he played, after bishop e7, he played the move h3. Because if now Carlsen would have played g5, that's now not as dangerous, as white has an extra tempo. And the extra tempo is that he did not play that move a3. So after g5 the bishop can go back to h2. If he still plays h5, then there is knight d2, and that's what white uses that extra tempo on. If you then play g4, like in the other variation, then there is h takes, and bishop takes, and this is better for white. Very, very subtle, and nice that Wesley So explained it. So in this position, he did not play a3 because of g5. He played h3, useful move. Carlsen, of course, must have seen all that as well, and he decided against g5. In this variation, it's not good. He castled. Now a3, and Carlsen played knight a5. Another variation that was looked at in the analysis after the game is b5, and then knight c5, knight takes, d takes, and Wesley So thought that also here white is slightly better. He was also slightly better in the game after knight a5 was played by Carlsen, knight c5 came, and knight c4 came, b4, knight takes, d takes, and again Wesley So said white is slightly better here. b6 was looked at in the press conference after the game and was given as a good alternative. Wesley So even joked that he has to go and ask Carlsen why did he not play b6. But the engine does not like b6, and maybe that's why Carlsen didn't play it. He must have seen that it's not good. The engine likes to take on c4, d takes, and then taking the queen. You take back with the bishop to keep the b6 pawn protected. But c takes b6 comes anyway. Bishop takes b6 and knight e5. And the engine likes this very much for white. After d takes c5, another option is b5. That was mentioned in live broadcast. But Carlsen went for knight takes a3. And that's probably not a very good move. Taking that pawn. But he will soon have to return the pawn. Knight e4 from Wesley So. Bishop e4. Saving that bishop. The bishop was kicked back. Bishop g6 out of the range of the knight. Queen b3 attacking the knight. Knight could have gone to b5. Wesley So said that's also better for him. But Carlsen played knight c4. Bishop takes, d takes, queen takes. White has his pawn back. And Wesley So said after black took on a3, this is forced. And here I'm a little better. So kept thinking all along that he was a little better in this exchange Slav. Queen e8 was played by Magnus Carlsen, and Wesley So said that he thought that Carlsen was playing for a win. He has the bishop pair after all, and he thought Carlsen wants to play e5. He had not expected that move. Wesley So had not expected Queen e8. He had expected bishop g5 to swap some material. Bishop takes, queen takes, and black should be okay. But as said, Queen e8 was played by Carlsen. Bishop g3, anticipating the e5 push. And e5 came, and the knight went to b3. Taking that pawn on e5 is not very good, because then black can take on c5 with a discovered attack on the bishop. That's okay for black. So knight b3 was played. So did not take on e5. And here again bishop g5 was expected by Wesley So, and he was very surprised to see the bishop go to another square. Carlsen played bishop d8, and So thought that Carlsen must have miscalculated here. He played queen d5. Carlsen played queen b5, counter-attacking the b4 pawn. His own pawn on e5 is hanging as well. Wesley So took it, and you cannot take the pawn on b4 because of bishop d6 hitting the rook, and if you save the rook, there is c6, and the bishop is now hitting the queen. White is winning, as he will take on b7 after black saves his queen. For example, queen b6, c takes b7, and this is winning for white. And it was Carlsen's first trainer, Simen Agdestein, who said, "This is typical Magnus, as he sometimes misses simple tactics." And everybody laughed, saying of the world champion that he misses simple tactics. Agdestein went even further and said that Fabiano Caruana, the number 2 in the world, also misses simple tactics. So there's hope for us all if the 2 best players in the world miss simple tactics. So after bishop takes e5, Carlsen now, he did see that he could not take on b4, and he played bishop e7, but this position is bad now. Queen d2, protecting the b4 pawn from So. Rook fd8, hitting the queen. Bishop d6, bishop f6, e4, h6, knight d4, hitting the queen. Bishop takes, queen takes, rook e8, rook fe1, king h7, and now Wesley So is going to advance on the king side. g4, f6, f4, queen c6, and f5. Wesley So said about these moves that my plan is to checkmate him. Very good plan. Bishop went back to f7, and So keeps pushing those pawns. h4. After all, he has an extra pawn on the king side, so that's where he has to play. Rook a8 from Carlsen. He wants to push his a pawn and puts the rook behind it. And Wesley So played rook c2, Later he said that he should have played rook c3. But rook c2 was played. There comes a5 as planned. g5, another pawn move on the king side. And bishop h5. And now So regretted that he did not have his rook on c3. Because then he could have played rook g3, he said. And there would be no bishop f3, which was a threat in the game. And with the rook on c2, that bishop f3 threat is there. Again, very subtle. And instead of bishop h5, Wesley So had expected Carlsen to give up a piece for 3 pawns. He expected that Carlsen would have played a takes b4 instead. And then g6 wins a piece because of the fork. Bishop takes, f takes check, and king takes. And Wesley So thought that Carlsen would want to play this position. But as said, Carlsen played bishop h5. We're on move 38, and here Wesley So spent almost all of his remaining time on g takes f6. But in the end, he decided on g6 check. And what he said was very instructive. He said, with g6 check, the black king will get stuck on the back rank, which will be winning for me if we ever get to an endgame. Already thinking about the endgame, and that's why he played g6 check. The king indeed had to retreat to the back rank, and Wesley So now played b5, giving up that pawn to penetrate with his rook. Carlsen took the pawn. Rook b2 was the 40th move, attacking the queen. Queen back to c6, and there the rook penetrates on b6, hitting the queen again. Queen back to c8, queen d5, hitting the b7 pawn. And here again Wesley So expected Carlsen to give up that useless bishop on h5 for some pawns. He expected the bishop takes g6, f takes g6, and then queen g4 check with some tricks. King f2, but no tricks were found. It's a desperate attempt, but it doesn't really work for black. Carlsen decided on something else. He did not give up that piece. He played a4, hoping for some counterplay with the a-pawn. So took that pawn on b7. White is winning here. And now rook takes g7 is a huge threat. And that's why Carlsen played rook g8. Because if you don't do that, if you for example play a3, then there is rook takes g7. You cannot take the rook because of queen f7 check and checkmate on the next move. And if after rook takes g7 you don't take the rook, you play a2, then it's the rook that gives checkmate. Very nice checkmate variations here. So after rook takes b7, Carlsen hurried back with the rook to g8 to avoid all that. But it was the last move that he made, because after c6, Magnus Carlsen resigned. White wins. And it was Wesley So's first classical win over Magnus Carlsen. A big day for him. Wesley So also showed that he had thought of rook c7 instead of c6. And it was a nice variation that I have to show you. Queen d8, and then the queen back to d2. And the threat is to take on h6 with the queen. Because if you push the pawn, for example, then there is queen takes h6 check, a nice queen sacrifice. Because after g takes h6, there is that rook checkmate again. So after queen d2, black will have to play rook e8, and this is also winning for white. But c6 was played in the end, was the choice from Wesley So, and Carlsen resigned here. In the live broadcast I looked at what happens after rook a6, and Wesley So was asked that question. After the game he said, well, rook b8 is an easy win, and it is indeed. A more spectacular win is c7 instead, and if you then take that piece, White might get the fright of his life, because you cannot take the rook, because then this rook is hanging. But there is queen takes g8 check as a very strong move, and that wins for White. King takes and rook b8, and White wins. But after c6, as said, Magnus Carlsen resigned, and the tournament is back open. Wesley So joins Magnus Carlsen in the lead, and as said, his first classical win over the world champion. Wesley So will really enjoy tomorrow's rest day. This is the moment of resignation, Magnus Carlsen extending his hand. So the results, 3 draws and a big win for Wesley So over Magnus Carlsen, which leads to this standing. I've now taken Ding Liren's 3 draws from the first 3 rounds out of the table, and I believe this is the way we should look at the table. Ding Liren's result will not be taken into account. So it's a very messy table. Many players have played 5 games and some have played 6 games. You should really look at the plus-minus score. So Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So lead the tournament with +1. And then we have many players on 50%. Aronyan, Karyakin, Anand, Nakamura and Karana are all on 50%. Mamedyarov and Vachier-Lagrave are on -1. 3 more rounds to go. Monday the 4th of June will be a rest day, and these are the pairings for Tuesday the 5th of June. We will see Mamedyarov against So, Vachier-Lagrave against Anand, Karana, Nakamura, Karyakin, Aronyan, and Magnus Carlsen will have another day to think about what went wrong against Wesley So. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel. Please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. You also may want to check my Chess to Progress channel. The link is in the description box. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.